Welcome to Season 2 of the Stick the Landing podcast, brought to you by Iron Business Solutions. We've got stories to tell and solutions to deliver for your gymnastics business. If you're new to the show, I encourage you to subscribe to all of our social media pages so you don't miss any valuable content. And feel free to go back and listen to some of the entertaining episodes from Season 1. Today, for the first time, my guest will be appearing remotely from Colorado. She is the 1996 U.S. Women's Olympic Team first alternate, multi-time USA national team member, a practicing physician's assistant, certified mindfulness meditation instructor, and author, Theresa Kulikowski Gillespie. Theresa, in addition to all the aforementioned titles, you're also a wife and a mom. When do you find time to sleep?
Well, thank you for that introduction. Yeah, I'm very blessed to have a lot of different roles in my life. It feels very, very fulfilling. So yeah, thanks for having me.
It is a shame for me because I keep bringing all these super, amazing, hyper-talented, hyper-driven people on the show. And then when my wife watches the episode, she's like, why can't you be like them?
I think you're very driven.
Well, I'm no physician's assistant, author. I'm not what you guys are, the people that keep appearing on the show. I don't know if you happened to catch the episode with Hootie Kabishian, the
Yes.
founder of Full Out. Another, she's a
Mhm.
PA and went back and did gymnastics to go to the Olympics. I'm a hillbilly from Tennessee over here, and I'm having all these amazing people. So let's jump right into sort of who you are in terms of the gymnastics world. Many of my longtime listeners will recall that in Season 1, I had Tom Forster on, and he talked about you as one of his athletes. So let's back up a bit, even before you and Tom met. And why don't you just tell us a little bit about your gymnastics journey and sort of how it began?
Yeah, so my dad was in the Army, and I was born in Tacoma, Washington. And when I was about 2.5 years old, we moved over to Germany. He was stationed over there as a nurse. I had an older sister who was enrolled in gymnastics. She
I
was
didn't
about
realize your
4
dad
years.
was a nurse in the military in some of our previous conversations. So
Yes,
being in
yeah,
the medical field is sort of a family tradition, to quote Hank
it's in
Williams.
the family. Yep. My
Yeah.
little sister's a doctor. My dad's a nurse.
Oh, wow. All right.
Yeah.
Sorry, cut you off. So two and a
No,
half.
that's okay. Yeah, so we moved over there. He was working at Ramstein, which was a hospital over there. My older sister, Jamie, was in gymnastics, and I would always go to the classes with my mom.
How much
And
older is Jamie than you?
about 2.5 years.
Okay.
Oh, I
So,
guess she was maybe closer to 5. Yeah,
and you were,
4 or 5, because I
okay.
was 2.5. And I kept running in on her classes. And so my mom would have to run out, pull me back. And this happened multiple times. And then finally she was like, can I just enroll her in the class? We're like, well, they have to be 3 years old, because they didn't do mommy and me classes
Sure.
back then. It was just like you started on your own. So she asked, and they're like, well, she's got to be 2.5, or she's got to be 3, and she's only 2.5. But they kind of made an exception and allowed me to start at 2.5 years old. And it was really my first love, and there was no turning back after that point.
Awesome. It's addicting. It's like, the opium of sports. Right.
Yes, yes.
So you mentioned that your older sister obviously was taking gymnastics. Did she ever get into competitive gymnastics or anything like that? And were there any sort of jealousy or rivalries because her little sister ended up being so good at the sport?
Yeah, my older sister was very good. She actually got, so back then it was classes, and she got to class 3. And then when it changed over to levels, she was a level 9. So she was very good.
Yeah.
When we were little, there wasn't really any rivalry. I mean, we lived in the gym, and then when we weren't in the gym, we were playing gymnastics at home.
Oh,
We had this
awesome.
teeny tiny, 3-inch balance beam that was wood and had a very thin layer of carpet on it. And we had it over a concrete floor in our basement. And we would play gymnastics in the basement. She was my coach. She was like my Romanian coach, kind
Oh,
of like
love
a
it.
Bella or Marta.
You guys never threw a comforter under the balance beam and called it a mat?
No, my mom had a very thin exercise mat that was like really cheap foam. It was maybe a half an inch. We put that underneath it because that was going to protect us.
So I have a horror story as a coach.
Mhm.
One of my really young athletes had just learned a double back on trampoline on our own. And of course, as coaches, what we do sometimes is I'll count three, 1, 2, 3, they go, and I throw the 8-incher onto the or onto the trampoline for them to land on. It makes the landing more forgiving or whatever. Well, I found out her and one of her teammates later that day went home to their trampoline in the backyard and didn't have an 8-incher. And of course, it's one of those crappy round trampolines from Walmart or whatever, and they're throwing a comforter on there, which of course, as soon as you land on that, not perfectly straight up and down, it's going to slide out from under your feet. And these kids were coming into practice the next day telling me all about it, how great it was, how they did like 600 double backs on the trampoline in their backyard. And I'm like, girls, please don't do that. All right, sorry. You had a basement balance beam. You guys played gymnastics. And so at what age did your sister sort of retire?
Around puberty, I guess. She was like 13, 14 years old, and she started developing other interests. She
Sure.
was much more social than I was, and kind of went through a little bit of a rebellious phase, I would say, and so moved away from gymnastics, and I stuck with it. So I think around that time, I wouldn't say there was jealousy or anything like that, but there was a little bit of like teasing and taunting and kind of like, oh, you're going to change. Your goals are going to change, and you're going to want to do other things with your life. And I was just kind of like so driven and kind of compulsive actually about my training.
Wow.
But we were very, very supportive of each other. And she went on to become a great dancer. And then she came back to gymnastics when we moved to aerials. So she tried to get a college scholarship. And I think if she hadn't quit for a couple of years, she would have been able to compete in college.
Wow. Thank you for listening to the Stick the Landing podcast, brought to you by Iron Business Solutions. The daily rigors of owning a gymnastics business present unique challenges. Get a gymnastics business mentor, one who's been in the trenches for more than 25 years, to walk with you through those challenges. One of our mentors will provide you with strategic business planning, a sounding board for problem solving, general gymnastics business tips, and more. Inquire today about our gold medal business package for a year-long mentorship program with one of our team of experts. Well, that's a perfect segue for my next question, which is, can you get me from Germany to Colorado, and about how old were you at the time?
Yeah, we moved back to Colorado when I was 4 years old. It was right around the 1984 Olympics. And again, it was because my dad was in the military and he was stationed there. So he got a job at Fitzsimmons Army Medical Center, which is actually still there. It's kind of a national monument because there was a president who was treated there. So Fitzsimmons has closed down, but the hospital is still there. We moved there in 1984. And before we even had housing on post, we found our gym, Gymnastics Institute, and we were living in this tiny little motel right off of post. And I remember so vividly sitting there watching the 1984 Olympics in this like teal green, teeny tiny motel with my little sister who was a baby, my older sister, and me. And we were just like glued to the TV watching the 1984 Olympics.
And watching Mary Lou win gold.
Watching Mary Lou. And I remember like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that too. I'm going to win the Olympics.
Wow. So you and I haven't discussed this yet, so here's a surprise question for you. Did you feel like your parents were good, supportive gymnastics parents, like healthy and the kind of things that you would be, if you were a gymnastics coach, you would want parents of your athletes to be this way?
Yes. My parents were very young. So they had my sister when they were teenagers, and they were like 22 when they had me. So they were young, but they were so supportive, and they knew that I loved gymnastics. And my dad worked 3 jobs so that he could pay for all of our dance and gymnastics. They were at every competition, dance performance. You name it. They would do anything and everything so that we could pursue our dreams.
Wow. So eventually then, of course, with your supportive parents, which is a critical issue here, you made it to Colorado Aerials and with Tom and Lori Forster. But there was a bunch of stuff that led up to getting there. Walk the audience through how you got from, hey, I'm just this kid who found her first gym, because my parents moved from Germany. And the reason I asked the question about did you feel like your parents were good gymnastics parents is I have experience with a lot of very good gymnastics parents. And I don't think your story is unique in the sense that a family moves and before they have a house, they have a gym for their kids. So, all right. So get us from, hey, we moved, we found our gym all the way up to, this is when I met Tom and Lori.
Yeah, that was about 8 years' time. So when we first moved to Colorado, Gymnastics Institute was the gym that we found in Aurora, Colorado. And my first coach was Mr. Arnold, who was actually pretty intimidating. He was this like bald guy, but black hair sticking out on the sides, really deep
I'm like, hey, what's
voice,
wrong
had
with
that kind
bald?
no, nothing, nothing, nothing wrong. But he was just intimidating, and he had that like really loud whistle. So every time we had to rotate events, it was like really loud whistle, and I was kind of scared of him. But I had him as my coach, and then this young lady named Martha, who actually went on to become a doctor. So I started with them. And then Steve Turley had this group called Hot Shots, which was kind of, as the name implies, it was the young, talented kids who might have potential to do something in the sport. And so Steve kind of took me under his wing. I joined the Hot Shots group. And as part of that, Lindy, her last name was Alexander at the time, it's Franzini now, she did beam and the choreography. So they were my coaches for several years. You know, at that time, you weren't able to start competing until you were 9. So I was doing the class 1 routines when I was 7,
Oh
and they
my.
let me do exhibitions. So I was kind of training with the big girls. These girls were literally twice my age, and I would train with them, and then I would do some hot shot stuff with Steve. I was learning the class 1 routines, and then I would do an exhibition at the end of a competition. And then finally at the age of 9, I was able to compete, and I competed AO. Remember advanced
Yep.
optional?
Yep.
It was the level A, like AO, I guess is what I started. And I did really well. I won state. I got to compete at regionals. I think I won beam at regionals. And then
It's
we had
because
a
you
new coach.
practiced on a 3-inch beam instead of a 4-inch beam.
Exactly.
You're like, this thing's a couch for crying out loud.
Right. Yeah, I got a lot of practice at home. Yeah, but then around the age of 10, so it was like 1990, we had a new coach come in, and I won't say his name. It wasn't a very positive experience, and
Hmm.
he was just more arrogant, and it kind of became all about him, and he ended up taking a lot of Steve's gymnasts, and he wanted me to go elite at the age of 10. And, they brought my parents into the gym. We had this really serious conversation. I wanted to go elite. My parents were hesitant, but they're like, okay, we trust this guy. And I ended up just developing mental blocks up the wazoo because I was being pushed to do things that I wasn't ready to do. And, everything I was just getting scared of.
We talk about that as a group of coaches at my gym. We call it too far, too fast.
Yes.
And we learn to recognize the symptoms of, hey, we're moving too quickly. This kid has gotten too far, too fast. We need to back down and let her just chill for a little while. So,
No, that's exactly what happened. Too far, too fast at 10 years old.
yeah.
So he took me to a zone meet, and I don't even remember how I did, but I think I did okay at it. It was at Cypress, I think, Cypress Gymnastics Academy in Texas. And then after that, I got back, and my parents and I had a conversation, and I was just burnt out already. 10 years old, I was burnt out. And so we decided to move from Gymnastics Institute, which was so sad because I loved Steve and Lindy. They were
Yeah.
phenomenal
But at
coaches.
that point, they
They
weren't
loved
coaching you
us.
really anymore.
Lindy was. Lindy
Okay.
still was, actually, because she did beam and choreography. But Steve was like a second dad to me. I mean, he brought me in. I remember one day in the gym, he brought me in to help him put down the vault runway. We were putting down a new vault runway, and I helped him tape it down. And then he bought me a thing of Rolos. And, he was just like, yeah, he was wonderful. I left
You
that
didn't
gym.
realize he was exploiting child labor there because he he got you to do work for a pack of Rolos that cost him 50 cents out of the vending machine. Hey, listen, guilty man, I've done all that
Yeah.
too. So
I'm sure I wanted to do it, because
right,
I just
right.
lived in the gym. I just wanted to do anything with gymnastics.
Okay, so at this point, you make a decision to leave.
We ended up finding a gym, and quite honestly, I don't know how we found it. Tex Womack, Richard Womack, he didn't even have his own gym. We trained out of a gym called Arapahoe Gymnastics Academy, I think is what it was called. And he had a small group of young athletes who he just rented a space in the gym. And I ended up joining them for a year. I took a year off of competition completely. Yeah. And we had a classical ballerina as our ballet teacher. So I really honed in on my dance skills
Did
and
you enjoy
learned.
the ballet part?
Yeah.
Okay, that
Yeah, very
makes
much
you, I
so.
think, unique in the gymnastics world
Yeah.
because until Betty Aquino took over, well, actually there was a coach before her, but the coach before Betty Aquino, anytime you'd go to camps, everybody's least favorite rotation was the dance rotation.
Really, I
Yes.
loved dance in those rotations. It
Well,
was one
you're
of
a
my
weirdo.
favorites. That's because my sisters and I grew up making up dances and, getting those demo tapes and, like, making up dances to the demo tapes and
Oh man, awesome. All
Oh,
right, so you
that's
got
fine.
Tex Womack, and he helps alleviate some of your too far, too fast by
Mhm.
going back to the basics. You take a year off of competition, and
And we did exhibitions here and there, like our classical ballerina teacher taught us a Russian dance, and we performed that. So I was performing, but it wasn't pressure packed. And then after about a year of working with him, it was 1992. And it's like, okay, we're coming into the next quad. If I want to go to the 1996 Olympics, I really have to be elite at this
so
point.
that was already on your mind. Like you were already sort of dialed in and
Oh,
planning for the future. Like, hey, I think 96 is what I want to. That's great.
oh,
And
I
you would.
knew that from the age of 4.
Oh, you do.
I had
When you were
done the
4,
math in
you
my
were
head.
you had a calendar. Okay, all right. Wow, wow.
I had
Again, that makes you
sayings
weird
on my
too.
wall written out, "I'm going to win the 1996 Olympics." And I had this
Wow.
from the age of 8 years old on my wall, and I would say it every day. I had cut out a construction paper gold medal and pinned it to my wall. I mean, it was my life, and it was yeah, 96 was what I had my sights set on for a long time.
Wow.
Tex ended up taking me to the zone meet at Jim and Cheryl Jarrett's gym in
Yeah.
Texas in San
Good old Cheryl
Antonio.
Jarrett. I love her. She's great.
Yeah,
I don't know
I
Jim
do
very
too.
well, but I know Cheryl, and she's fantastic. Okay, so you're at
Yeah,
their
she
gym
is.
doing an elite zone meet.
Yeah, yeah. Stayed with my aunt there because her husband was in the Army and he was stationed there, so I got to stay with family, and I did very poorly because I think it was primarily Tex didn't really know the code, and he didn't know how to, you know, construct the right routines with the right amount of difficulty, and I think I ended last, I don't actually know, but during that time, I saw Tom and Lori Forster, and they had Donnie Thompson, Missy
Yeah.
Leopoldis, and Kim Young. And they were just, I don't, it was so interesting because as I reflect on it, there was like an energetic draw to them. I saw them there and I'm like, they just look like this nice family almost. And their gymnastics was beautiful. The form, the technique, the difficulty. And I knew that they were in Colorado. So it was kind of at that moment, I went back home and right away I'm like, I want to go train at Ariel's. We lived an hour away at that time. And parents are like, oh my gosh, your older sister's in high school. Your younger sister has an established dance facility. What are we going to do here? We took a trip down to Ariel's and I loved it.
Hmm.
So my parents ended up commuting for 6 months. They would drive, one of them would drive me down. The other one would take my sisters to their dance. And well, I think they were both dancing at that time. So yeah, we'd drive an hour down. I'd train for 5 hours. We'd drive an hour back, get home about 9:30, do the whole thing the next day for about
Wow.
6 months. And then
How many days a week were you
in
working out at that period?
6,
Yeah. Goodness.
yeah.
Was there any did you have any sort of like lingering loyalty issues? Did you feel bad when you left Tex? Did you guys connect or have a good relationship, or was it just talk to me a little bit about that. Did it feel bad to leave that situation?
I definitely made good friends, and it was kind of a 180 from what I was used to because I was used to training with kids who were so much older than me, and at Texas, most of the girls were younger than me, so I got to kinda play and reconnect with my younger spirit for a year, So I definitely missed them. I missed the girls. I don't think I really bonded deeply with Tex like I did
Got it.
Steve and Lindy.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's sort of what I was asking. If there was any sort of like
Yeah.
guilt or remorse, like, man, I don't want to leave these guys or I don't want to leave this coach, but I really have to do what I think is good for me. And you didn't have to experience because you were really only with him for about a year.
Hmm.
Okay. Did he ever express how he took the decision or was it hard on him at all or?
I don't know. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, I was 12 years old, so I was
Sure. So
probably
your
just
parents
very
probably
much,
handled all that, right? They were the ones
yeah,
that said, "Oh, well, Mr. Womack, thank you for all you've done for Teresa, but we're out of here. We're heading to Tom and Lori."
yeah. It was an essential time, I think, because it gave me a break when I really, really needed it. And I don't know if I would have been able to last another 4 years had I not had a year off of competition.
And for him to be willing to go back and just spend a lot of time on basics with you and whatever to help you recover from what we keep talking about too
Yeah.
fast. All right,
Yeah.
well, let's move forward a little into your elite career. You have a whole bunch of interesting stories from your junior elite career. You want to share some of those with us?
Yeah. So, I mean, I got there when I was 12 and I was kind of behind the eight ball, I guess, or behind the curve because Donnie had already qualified for junior elite. She was really at the top of her game at that point. So I needed to go to zone meets and then qualify. Um,
Wait, what year
and
would
so,
this have been? And unfortunately, when you say, "Hey, I was 12 and this year," everybody's going to be able to
oh
figure out
yeah,
how old you are now. But
right, 1992. I was born
okay,
1980.
all right,
Yeah, this was 1992. Um, and Tom took me to a zone meet at Christy Craft's gym, and it
in
was in the
Oklahoma.
middle. Yeah, it was in the middle of the summer. It was deathly hot, and so hot that they allowed us to wear short sleeve leotards, which was usually not allowed back then.
Yep.
We did optionals the first day, compulsories the second, which that was different too. But I remember Tom saying, like, I was just all business. I didn't complain about anything. I was just there to get the job done. I qualified. And then there must not have been a classic for junior. I don't know. Maybe you remember this. It's funny. I don't remember all these details,
I
but I
wasn't
think I qualified
involved in
directly
that sort of level of gymnastics at that
at the
point.
time.
Yeah, I in
Yeah.
fact I didn't start coaching women's gymnastics until early 1991. So
Oh, okay. Okay. So I don't think I had to go to a classic. I think I qualified directly to championships that year. So 1993, actually. So I trained a year and then summer of 1993 is when I went to that zone meet, qualified. So I made my first USA championships. And it was about a week before we had to leave for championships, which were ironically in Salt Lake City, where I ended up going to school for
yeah,
college gymnastics. Um, but about a week before, I was doing a dismount on bars, I think, and kind of peeled off, and I got a mat burn on my foot. Didn't think anything of it, but like all these mats are so bacteria ridden. And within a couple of days, I started noticing my foot was getting really red and swollen, and it was killing me, like that throbbing hot
yeah.
pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just kept taping it tighter. Like maybe if I just tape it a little tighter, it won't
All
hurt as
right.
bad. But it got worse. And then one day I looked down at gym and there was like a red streak coming up my leg. And so of course I tell Tom and Lori and they say, go to the ER. Donnie's dad was an ER doctor, so he got me in right away. I was diagnosed with cellulitis and blood poisoning, and I was put on IV antibiotics right away. But I had to miss going to championships with the team. This was like my first big elite competition, and I had to go by myself a couple days late because I had to do IV antibiotics and like watch this infection. But I ended up getting there and, had a decent competition. I think I maybe had a fall. I always had falls. But I qualified for the junior national team in 1993. I think I was maybe 10th out of 12. So I made it and that was really cool.
Despite blood poisoning, made it. So
Yeah.
I wasn't on my way to any kind of important national championships or anything, but I was born in 1972. And if you can remember the late 70s and early 80s, the trend for socks was, you pull them all the way up to the yahoos. If you think back to those NBA players wearing their big old striped socks. So I might have been 9 or 10 years old, and it was summertime, and so I'm running around, and this is again in the 80s when your parents have no idea where you are, except you come home at 5 o'clock for dinner, and then when the street lights come on, you come back home. That's about it. So I got a big
Mhm.
gash on my shin. I don't remember what I did, but it was a significant gash on my shin. But things were a lot cheaper back then, and so we didn't carry dollars because you didn't need dollars. We just carried coins. And remember the shorts were kind of tiny then too. So the best place to keep my money was in my sock. So my coins frequently were on the gash
Oh,
in my sock. So I've got this gash, and now 3 or 4 days into it, I'm starting to limp because man, this really hurts, and like it's throbbing, and and the sore is really hot. But no way I'm telling my mom about this because she's
no.
gonna make me. It's summertime, right? And she's gonna make me stay home and put bandages on it and bologna or whatever. Well, like 2 days later, I'm limping pretty severely, and there's a big red streak going up my leg, and my mom sees.
Mm.
She's like, "Are you limping?" And I'm like, "No, I'm fine." And she's, "Get over here," and she pulls the sock down, and this thing is all like, I'm surprised there weren't maggots in it. It was so
Oh.
disgusting. So I got blood poisoning, and like you, I had to get an IV like antibiotic because it was pretty significant, and they had to wash it all out. But I didn't have any important gymnastics meets to go to, so I guess it was fine. I was just playing in the cornfields with my buddies a few days later. So, all
Oh,
right, sorry. More
awful.
stories. Talk to me about, didn't Kim Zemeskel come to your gym and work out? Because she was a big deal back then. Because
Yeah.
92, she was a star of the game. Those games were in Barcelona, right? And that
Mhm.
was her.
Yeah.
That was Shannon Miller's sort of breakout. And her and Shannon Miller were the stars.
Yeah, I mean, Kim Zmeskal had won world championships in 1991, and she was my absolute childhood idol. She and Svetlana Boganskaya, interesting, like 2 very different athletes, but I love them both, and I think it was after it was after the Olympics. She came to our gym for something. I don't think she was training. It was just kind of to, I don't know, make an appearance, but she came to Donnie's house, and we have a picture of her, Donnie, me, and one of our other teammates,
And for our
in
audience,
front of
she's talking about
Donnie's.
Donnie Thompson, and
Oh, yeah,
she
Donnie
and Donnie
Thompson,
Thompson
yeah.
were like tight. They were like this growing
They
up.
were
Okay,
like
so
best
she
friends.
came to Donnie's house, and you guys got to
Yes.
hang out with her.
Yes, yes. We were just starstruck
Yeah, did that
for
make you guys like
sure.
the queen bees of the gym for a little while? Because
Mhm.
I know Kim Zemesco. Back then, you'd have had her cell phone number, but their cell phones hadn't been invented
Right,
yet. But you know,
right. Now I have it.
so
Yeah,
are you the queen bee now because you have Kim Zemesco's
I
cell
must
phone number?
be.
Like, you're not flaunting that, dropping that name everywhere you
I
go.
brag about it
Yeah.
everywhere I go.
After I do these podcasts, I drop names all the time. Me and my good
I
friend
bet.
Theresa Kulikowski were having a chat the other day. So, speaking of Donnie,
Mhm,
you and she were tight because you guys were
mhm.
both kind of. There was three of you. It was you, Donnie Thompson, and who was the third junior that was running around with you guys at?
Christy Powell.
That's right, Christy Powell.
Christy Powell.
And but you and
She
Donnie
came a
were
little bit later, but mhm.
you and Donnie were good friends. Talk about that relationship and how special that was.
Yeah, I mean, we spent 5 hours together each day in the gym, and then we oftentimes had sleepovers, and, her grandma was this phenomenal woman, and she lived there in Colorado, and oftentimes Donnie would spend the night at Granny's house, and I would get to go too, so Granny kinda became my second grandma,
Nice.
and there was a TCBY, the Country's Best Yogurt. They don't have them anymore, but
No, that
there
was
was
a
a yogurt.
staple in the 80s and
Oh,
90s, people, man.
it
It was
was my
called a light
favorite.
bite parfait. That's what I always got because it would be like some toppings. I always got Oreos and then a flavor of yogurt and then another topping. And then I got more Oreos and then
Yes,
yogurt and then topping one more time, man. And so for
on
me, it was
top.
chocolate, frozen yogurt, and 3 layers of Oreos. And I was good to go.
Yeah, and Granny would always take us to TCBY. So when we were doing two-a-days, we would have our morning practice, and then Granny would pick us up, take us to TCBY yoga. I mean, it was right in the parking lot of the gym, so we couldn't miss it. And then we'd go home, we'd play at Granny's house, maybe we'd go to the pool, and then we'd go back for our evening practice. And then sometimes I would spend the night at their house after that. We'd go and get another TCUI yogurt.
So
So
Donnie's granny had a pool. Was it in ground or above ground?
it wasn't her pool. She lived in a really nice area in
Oh,
Garden of
okay.
the Gods. And so there was a Garden of the Gods country club.
Oh,
And so
so
she would take us
Donnie's
to the
granny was
pool.
loaded, is
Yeah.
what you're telling me. Yeah. Good for you
Yeah.
guys. Good for you guys. What an
Yeah.
awesome experience. Are you and Donnie still friends?
Yeah, we're still friends. Interestingly, I mean, this is just such a small world. 2 summers ago, she texted me kind of out of the blue. We stayed in touch over the years, but not super close. She texted me and sent me this link that said JD Reeve, head coach of West Point men's gymnastics. JD Reeve is her husband.
Yeah.
We're living here at West Point. And Donnie texted me like, we're moving there this summer. And I'm like, you're kidding me. So now they live less than a mile down the road from us. JD is the head coach of the West Point men's gymnastics team. And Donnie and her 2 kids, who are phenomenal gymnasts, are training there too.
I forget that you're in New York.
Yes.
I keep thinking that you're in Colorado because I keep
Colorado's-
associating that. So when you and I have been texting back and forth and we're talking about time changes, I keep thinking, like this morning, I was up at 6 and responded to your text from last night. And I was like, well, no way she's going to see this because it's 4 in the morning in Colorado. But I'm in the central time zone. So that'd have been 7
My
7 for
time.
you. So you were probably up and at 'em at that point.
Yes. Yeah, we're in New York.
Talk to me about qualifying senior. Do you remember when that happened? And give me some fun memories.
They were mixed memories. I was always injured, and so my
Mm.
time as a senior elite was pretty hard. I had a really bad hamstring tear that just would not go away.
They
I
don't.
was
It's one of the.
growing.
It's hamstring
Oh,
and back. If your gymnast has a hamstring injury or a back injury, it seems like it's forever.
yes. Yeah, it was over a year and a half that I was dealing with this thing. So 1994, I did qualify for senior elite. But I think it was that year that I tore the hamstring. So it was just very up and down. I mean, at American Classic, I wasn't able to compete because of my hamstring. I flew all the way out there, and my parents did not have a lot of money. And so it was stressful to have to tell my mom I'm not able to compete. They weren't there. I was actually there with Donnie, and her parents were kind of like my second parents when we were there. It was in Florida. And I wasn't able to compete. I had to pull out of the meet because I couldn't run down the vault runway. It hurt so badly.
Oh,
So then I'm like calling my mom, I can't compete. And then she's like, oh my God, we pay all this money and you've invested so much time and you can't compete. So just the disappointment. It felt like there was disappointment after disappointment. But I was able to make national team. I made it in 1994 and then I made it in 1995. And in 1995, I, again, had multiple falls at championships, but somehow qualified to world team trials. And I
wow.
had a decent meet at world team trials, enough to be like, I don't know, maybe a second or third alternate. And for some reason that year, a lot of the athletes were either injured or they decided not to compete at world championships, which I don't know the backstory there. But Donnie and I got called up to compete at world
Wow.
championships.
All right. Where were worlds that year?
Sabai, Japan.
Oh, there's some stories here.
Yeah. This was my first international meet.
So your first international outing
15.
was world championships.
Yes.
Your first assignment. They're like, Theresa, we think your first experience internationally should be, how about world championships?
Yes.
So when you were
Yes.
named, were you stoked out of your mind? Like, oh my goodness, I'm going to go compete at world championships? Or, well,
I was terrified.
okay.
Yeah. I was always very, very anxious as a competitor. I didn't really learn how to do that until a little bit later in my career. And so when I was called up for that, I'm like, oh my God, this is terrifying. Fortunately, Donnie was there. And then Carrie Strug had also come to our gym for a little bit.
That's right.
And she made the team. So I wasn't doing it by myself. And so there are actually 3 of us, 3 of us competed together. And then the whole trip just started horribly.
Yeah,
Out of
walk us
Colorado
through it.
Springs. Out of Colorado Springs, our flight was delayed to Denver or something. That's like a 30-minute quick hop over to Denver, but we were delayed. So then out of Denver, we're delayed, and we get to San Francisco where we're supposed to meet up with the team. And we get there and they're still on the ground, but it was like a mile. It felt like an eternity away from us. And they're like, okay, grab your bags. We're gonna fly through the airport and try and get there. We had these massive bags filled primarily with snacks. And we're just like hauling them through the airport. And we get there. This was before you had cell phones or anything to communicate.
Right.
We get there and the plane had taken off. They left
Oh,
without us. So the whole rest of the team had gone to Japan without us. And so we were stuck in San Francisco overnight. And this was probably one of the best times of the entire trip because we found a local gym. We had a good practice. Then we went to the hotel that night. And I remember things just felt light. You know, we were laughing about goofy things and hanging out with Tom and Lori in the hotel room. But then the next day, it was like the reality set in.
well, we got to
We
get to Japan
traveled
and we're
and
a day behind.
yeah,
Yeah.
and we got there and I mean, the time zone change was really, really challenging, and we got there in the middle of the night and maybe got a few hours of sleep, and then we had to wake up and go to train, and then we had podium training that night.
Ugh.
We did horribly. So Tom and Lori made us go back to the gym to, like, stick landings and work on
Oh
things
my
that we had messed
goodness.
up on.
Wait,
It was,
they
like,
wanted
9 o'clock at
you to
night.
stick the landing?
Stick the
Ah, see
landing.
what I did here? Like, all right,
Yes.
I'm here all
Yeah, I
day.
did not intend to say that. Um, yeah, and so we ended up going back to the training gym, and Donnie was struggling so badly. She just could not stick a beam dismount for the life of her. Her back was killing her, and I landed a dismount really low, and my quads just seized up, and from that moment on, the rest of the trip, my legs were like lead, and
Oh,
I just felt bad the entire trip. And, you know, Bella was the head coach. Steve Nuno was there with Shannon. There were some big coaches there that I think were probably pretty intense. And like the stress was trickling down through all of the coaches. And then we as athletes felt it as well. So
yeah.
fortunately, I had Donnie and Carrie, and we kind of stuck together. But as a team, we were not a cohesive unit. Each of us were just in our own individual rooms. I called home crying
Mm.
every single day, and all of my per diem went to our phone bill.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, geez, what did it cost to call from Japan to Colorado in 1995? I imagine it ate up your
Oh.
per diem in about 45 seconds.
Well, we had a lot of per diem. I mean, I guess I think it was like $800 or something, and pretty much every penny of it went to the phone
Oh my
bill.
goodness.
Because I mean, I called whatever, call collect. I don't even know how you did it back then. My mom's like, "Oh my God, you're halfway across the world. There's nothing I can do for you. I will listen to you, but you just have to make it through."
How did
And I
people
did.
who were parents at such a young age have such a
Oh,
mature perspective throughout handling all every time you tell a story that involves your parents, I go, man, that somebody their age shouldn't have had that capacity. What how fortunate, how blessed were you to grow up in that home?
yeah, it's very true. I mean, my mom was always a seeker, and she was always reading things and trying to
Mm,
be the absolute best parent that she could be. And I was we were all very gifted at what we did. And so, in some ways, it made her job easier because we were very driven and motivated, and she didn't have to have a lot of like boundaries and rules around us. But at the same time, we were very driven and perfectionists and had like issues that evolved from that. So she was like kind of trying to find a middle
were
ground
your
there as a
parents
mom.
like good athletes when they were young? Did they play sports? Like, it
Well, my mom was never given the opportunity, but she
was a different
is
era. Yeah.
she was very athletic. She played softball, she did some cheerleading, and then she was an avid runner for years when we were growing up, did, like, marathons, and
Oh my
my
goodness.
dad was a very good athlete too. He probably could have played baseball in college, but he had awful scoliosis because his mom was drinking alcohol when she was pregnant with him, and so his whole life, he had this horrible scoliotic curve, and in high school, he was put in basically like an iron brace that was from here down,
Oh
and he
my
had to
goodness.
stop playing sports. But he was incredibly athletic. So yes, I would say both my parents were athletic.
So genetics played a role in all the girls being so athletic when in your
Yeah, I think
house.
so.
All
And then
right.
the nurture part too, that they just encouraged us in
Yeah.
every way that they could.
Yeah. Yeah. What good parents. So it sounds like
Yeah.
you had my wife's name is Jennifer, and it sounds like you had two Jennifers at your house.
Oh.
Not a
Well, my
Ken in there because he was I was encouraging and supportive of my kids, but there was probably some times when I was a little more intense than I needed to be.
mm. Well, my dad was not around much because he was working 3 jobs to try to pay for it all. So my mom really was the emotional support, but my
Well,
dad
that makes him a
was
great
very
dad,
motivating. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, he sacrificed a lot. He definitely did.
You're listening to the Stick the Landing podcast, brought to you by Iron Business Solutions. Adjusting tuition upward to account for inflation and market tolerance is one of the most difficult and important decisions we as gym owners face. Let Iron Business Solutions take the guesswork out of what you should be charging. We'll perform a full market analysis and deliver a plan to get you into your sweet spot, including a schedule and the wording of emails. Inquire today about our tuition calculator package with a money-back guarantee if your business is already within market tolerance. We're still in your senior year. We're not quite up to some of the stuff I want to talk about, but when
Mm.
you and I had conversations leading up to this, you told me that the U.S. Classic in San Antonio was special. Why was that?
I think it was actually Palm Springs. That may have been my fault if I said San Antonio because it was
Okay,
Palm
Palm
Springs.
Springs.
Yeah. I was finally coming back from the torn hamstring because it had kept me out of a classic. It had kept me out of championships. And so that classic, I just felt like everything was coming together in the
Mm,
way that it needed to be. All of my training, all of my intentional practice was finally paying off. And I think I ended up second in the all around. I hit an entire meet, which was very, very rare for me. So it's just a confidence booster.
wow. Wow.
Yeah.
And you're coming up on 96, which was what was on your wall since you were 8 years old. I'm going to win the Olympics. So
Yeah.
that had to really feel great. Like, hey, first of all, I got an international assignment, which was World Championships. Now, maybe that didn't go the way I wanted, but the following classic, you're uninjured, or
Mhm.
stuff has to feel like it's starting to fall into place for 1996. So let's talk
Mhm.
about that year, and let's start with, tell me a little bit about like maybe nationals or the classic, even talk a little bit about Olympic trials for you. Talk
Mhm.
about those experiences, what the meets were like, and what you knew
Mhm.
or didn't know in terms of being able to get qualified.
Yeah, the year itself was different. Donnie had quit after the
Yeah.
1995 World Championships. She quit and she was like my buddy in the gym. But Christy was there, and so Christy and I ended up becoming closer because it was just her and I. We were the only two who were training for the Olympics at that point. Kim Young had gone off to college to compete at Stanford. Missy went to Penn State. So yeah, Christy and I. Michelle Dussert had come at that point as a coach, and she was a great addition.
Mm.
She helped us with our nutrition, making sure that we were eating enough because I was compulsively like a fat-free fiend, which was definitely not good for me as an elite athlete. So I think my nutrition was a little bit better. We started reading a book called Mental Toughness Training for Sport. And I devoured that book. I mean, I think I made margins in every single page and was just making mental notes of everything
How
part.
common was that in the elite world back then in 96 for uh, athletes to be focusing on mental training? It seems like I still wasn't quite in the elite world. I was at a gym where there were some elites, but I didn't have anything to do with
Mhm.
those guys. But the um, nobody was talking about that at all, training the mind, which is going to be good later. We're going to talk about this a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I think it was a new thing. Mary Lee Tracy, I think, was very into the mental
Not at
training.
all surprised. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because Amanda Borden and JC were very intentional with their mental training, as far as I remember. And then Tom and Lori introduced this the year moving into the Olympic trials. And so we would do our morning training. I was homeschooling at this time because I wanted to dedicate all my time to
Sure.
gymnastics. we would do like 2.5 hours of compulsories in the morning. And then we would dedicate like 30 to 45 minutes to talking about the mental side of things and talking about the book and
Every day.
implementing these techniques. I think we did compulsories 3 times a week. So it was
Okay.
like anytime we had a morning practice, we
So 3
stayed
times a
after.
week, you guys did mental training at the gym.
Mhm.
Oh, that's
We talked
fantastic.
about the book and
Wow.
yeah. And I think that was really a game changer for me, just learning how to kind of actually get out of my head because I was always very like too in my head when I would compete. And by that I mean talking a lot. Like, okay, let me say this before this. And then instead of just like, okay, these are my few key words, let me get myself relaxed and then trust my body to do what it knows how to do in competition. So I think I was finally kind of figuring that out around the 96 championships.
Wow. All right. So
And then,
we got championships and whatever, and you're in the thick of stuff.
mhm,
I don't have all the data in front of me, but kind of covered this in season 1, episode 2 with Tom about
mhm,
you guys and where you were leading up there, and you were in the thick of it. One of those meets, you were top 5, I think, and the other one you might have been like 8th or 9th or something in there where it wasn't out of the realm of possibility that you were going to make it. So we're going into trials,
mhm.
and you're a kid essentially at this point. What did you know? Oh, I know I'm gonna need to do this to qualify to the Olympics.
I didn't know like right before trials, but I think once we got there and we knew that Shannon and Dominique weren't going to be competing, then it was kind of like, okay, you're going to have to be in the top 5. But I don't ever remember thinking in my mind or putting more pressure on myself. I have to be in the top 5 to make the Olympic team. It was more just like we had done all this mental training and I knew that I just had to do one routine at a time.
Wow. Such a mature
And
perspective. And it sounds like the mental training was highly effective.
yeah, it was. It made a big difference.
So do you remember the meet? Do you remember competing?
I remember parts of it.
Theresa,
Like
you're
little
killing me.
snippets.
You're
But this is what
killing me.
happens when you're like in a zone. I don't remember a lot of my competitions because you're in a different mind state. You should be in a different mind state if you're going to have a good competition. Like that flow state
Well,
is really something that we're not embedding in our memory.
it's a fantastic like mindset to be in while you're competing. It's a crap
Mhm.
mindset to be in if you're going to come on a podcast 30 years later and talk about it.
Right? Yeah, that's
So
true.
listen, all you kids that are
Sorry.
out there competing in big meets this year, I need at least half of you to not be in a zone mentally and just be like taking mental snapshots and remember what's going on so you can come on the show.
Remember everything and tell
Right?
the story.
So do you remember how like was it a good meet for you? Did you hit like what went on?
Well, compulsories, I believe compulsories was weighted 60%. It was like a 60-40. They put a lot more emphasis on compulsories back then, which was in my favor because I was very technical. I didn't have as much difficulty as some of the athletes did, but compulsories was where I needed to hit if I was going to make the team. And I was in 5th place uh, as a floor, which was our 3rd event in the first day. Beam was my last event, and I mounted, which was this kind of like side kickover mount, turned to do my side, it's like a shoulder roll, I guess is what we call it, over the shoulder, like with your head to the side. And I
Yeah.
rolled right off the beam.
Oh no.
And so I know in that moment, I don't know what was going through my mind. Like you just have to get up and keep going. And the rest of my routine was good. I'm able to watch it on YouTube, but I really can't watch that routine very often. I've seen it, but it's heartbreaking. And then they show Tom. Christy had a fall earlier in that day, and they show him like, devastated. And then I fall, and they show him like this, and it was just so sad.
Hmm.
And then going into optionals though, I knew I had nothing to lose. It was like, you just go out there and do anything and everything that you can. And I did just that. Um, Interestingly, the other day on my birthday, International Gymnast posted my floor routine from Olympic
Yeah.
trials. And I showed my son saw it and he's like, "Is that you?" And I said, "Yeah." And he's like, "Oh, I want to watch it." And he said, "What did you score on that?" And I'm like, "I have no idea." So I went back and I looked at the scores And I was so close, like, I don't know if I hadn't have fallen, I don't know if I would have made it, but I did finish 6th. And
Yeah.
technically top 7 were to make it. But Dominique and Shannon's scores were significantly higher than mine from championships. And so it bumped me to 8th. And I was the official first alternate.
Okay, so speaking of you being the first alternate, when Tom was here, it's something that I don't know if bitter's too strong of a word, but he definitely isn't happy about your treatment as the Olympic alternate because the games were in Atlanta and USA Gymnastics basically said, well, because we're in country, she doesn't get to travel. And I think he said you didn't even get apparel.
Mm-mm.
So
I didn't get anything.
there was
Yeah.
veritably no recognition that you even existed as an Olympic alternate. And like, in the last games that we just watched on TV, the alternates travel overseas. They're there on the TV screen. They're high-fiving people. They're a part of it all and whatever.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about that because I know because of prior conversations, there was some disappointment and some difficulty in training.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really hard. I mean, I was 16 years old. I didn't know how to process all of this.
Sure.
I knew that Shannon and Dominique were better than me. I mean, they were my idols. I idolized Shannon Miller. I loved Dominique's gymnastics, and I knew that they were better than me. And I also knew that it wasn't fair what had happened. And I, speaking of things that I remember from the competition, I remember very vividly the team getting announced, this big spotlight in the middle of the floor. And I was off of the podium, kind of in this darkened area. And I just started crying because I was so close. Like, this was a lifelong dream. And it was that bittersweet feeling of so close yet so far away. I wasn't introduced as an alternate, whereas now they do that. So maybe hopefully they learned from this experience. Like, nobody has really, other than through podcasts and like people like you or Nicole Langevin who have asked, how did this really land on you? Nobody in USA Gymnastics has ever asked, how did this affect you? And I don't feel entitled to it, but I do think
I'm not
that there
suggesting
was,
that, but
there was an unfairness to it for sure. And then it was basically like, you have to go back and keep training just in case you get called up.
Yeah.
But nobody really talked me through, this is what is expected of you. In the meantime, the team was together. They were taken off to train together. They were getting special food, and like everything was very tailored to them to be ready.
Yep.
And I was just off back at my gym trying my hardest to stay motivated and in routine shape. In the event somebody was injured, and getting all these questions like, oh, I bet you're excited for somebody to get hurt. Are you just hoping somebody gets hurt? And I'm like,
oh, come on.
No.
Yeah.
Quite honestly, at that point, it was kind of like this all or nothing feeling. I'm like, I just want to go on vacation.
Wow.
Because it was such a letdown after that experience that mentally it took everything in me to get into the gym and to keep training. And partially probably, I would think, because I didn't feel like I was part of the team,
Yeah, geez. Well, maybe USA Gymnastics looked and saw sweet little Theresa Kulikowski crying in the shadows.
Nobody knew.
And said, we got to do better next time. Seems like they
I don't think
do
anybody
better
knew
now.
that.
Yeah, or cared, which is a shame. It's a shame.
Yeah, it is a shame. They do much better now. I think it's
Yes.
great. I mean, granted, the teams are much smaller. They actually did have somewhat of an inherent alternate because it was 6 up, 6 up on each event, and they had 7 people on the team. So in a way, they had an innate alternate already, but that was the official team, and they got to pick and choose from those 7 who went up on what event. I think that was maybe one of the first years they did that.
This is the Stick the Landing podcast, brought to you by Iron Business Solutions. Get your gymnastics business to line up with your ultimate vision for your business. Hire one of our experts for an on-site consultation and achieve a better work-life balance. Earn a better income for you and your staff. Get strategic planning for class logistics, hiring, training, and more. Get a financial plan and an exit strategy. All of this with 10 months of support in our custom solutions package. Inquire today on our website or send us a DM on social media. Well, moving off of that bombshell, did you ever have a moment while you were once you'd gone with, say, Tom and Lori, where you had some kind of setback or a moment where you just sort of just wanted to quit gymnastics altogether?
I had a lot of setbacks just with all of the injuries
Sure.
and earlier in my career with all of the fear stuff. But quite honestly, I didn't let myself entertain the idea of quitting. It just wasn't something that I allowed myself to think about,
Wow.
partly because I have OCD tendencies and it was kind of like a bit compulsive that this is just something that I have to do.
Hmm.
And at times I did lose touch with the love of the sport for sure, but I don't think I ever entertained quitting.
Do you think that any of the sort of setbacks, the injuries or the hard times or whatever that you experience, and you talk very clinically, like right now, you just said, hey, I had some compulsion about doing
Mhm.
gymnastics. Did any of that play a role or act as a catalyst for you to write your book?
Yeah, I would say in sum, my whole experience as a gymnast played into me wanting to write the book. But at the moment, obviously, when I was in the thick of gymnastics, I wasn't thinking about writing a book. And even years after, I never thought about writing a book about gymnastics because when I was done, I was just so burnt out. I had done it for 21 years. My body was falling apart. And I didn't really want anything to do with gymnastics for several years. So it wasn't until maybe the last 10 years that I started reconnecting with my love of gymnastics and then thought about writing a book.
Again, I use the phrase, you talk very clinically about your gymnastics because I think you're a very introspective and analytical person, and because of your certifications and your mindfulness meditation certifications and your understanding of sort of mental health and the fact that you did all that mental training helps you now be able to process. Because when you were 17, you weren't going, boy, I'm compulsive about this. You just were
Right.
existing, right? But now you
Yeah.
look back and you process what gymnastics was for you, and you see some things that were a little bit on the unhealthy side, but not. It wasn't other people creating unhealthiness. Your just
Right.
response was unhealthy. And do you think once you started doing that sort of analytics, is that what made you go, I need to write this book because it might
Mm.
help coaches or even athletes? Is- You think that's
Yes.
what did it?
Yeah.
Okay,
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. It's the hindsight 2020 kind of perspective
sure.
where we have more wisdom, we have more insight. And I definitely wanted to share the true stories, my own and others, both the highs and the lows of the elite journey. Um, And then not just tell the story, but educate on ways to bring more of a holistic approach to allow athletes to reach their fullest potential in the sport, because obviously that's important. And also nurture the person health and well-being so that they haven't like completely fallen apart or they don't completely fall apart when they leave the sport.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm,
And you and I talked in our sort of pre conversations leading up to this that,
mhm.
because you sent me an advanced copy of the book and stuff, that I think that the material in this book, which I guess we're just going to start talking about it. Let's
Sure.
do it. It's natural.
Yeah.
Um, it, I think that this book is helpful for coaches because I have seen many times as a coach when it is time for an athlete to retire, and every athlete will face the time that they have to retire. And
Mhm,
many of those athletes have to retire before they want to, right?
mhm,
They all have to face it. And I don't know if it's unique to our sport. I think the degree to which it happens is unique to our sport, but
mhm,
they face an identity crisis,
mhm,
because these kids, if I use my daughter's name here, she's Mackenzie the gymnast. And that's how she knows herself and who she thinks she is. And because she's doing, 20 to 30 hours a week of gymnastics, of course it makes sense I'm Mackenzie the gymnast. And I also do these other things. I also, go to school and have a sibling and parents and whatever, but I'm Mackenzie the gymnast. And then when the switch gets flipped and gymnastics is done, and you have that 30-hour-a-week hole in your life, and you're not Mackenzie the gymnast anymore, you're looking around going, what am I? Right? And I think this book is a good book for coaches to read, because if you're doing a good job, if you care about your athletes and you're doing a good job as a coach with your athletes, you're helping them avoid the pitfall of believing that what they are is Mackenzie the gymnast. She's
Yes.
Mackenzie the human being who does gymnastics.
Who does gymnastics?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so let's
Well,
just say it,
yeah.
people. Theresa wrote a book, and it's called Beyond the Chalkbox.
Yes.
Right? All right. Beyond the Chalkbox.
Yes.
Okay, go finish the thought we were just talking about, Mackenzie who does gymnastics.
Yeah, just when you said, what am I? It kind of makes me think, or backtracking a little bit to around 2017. I've been on a healing journey since 2014 when I became really disabled, which has given me a lot of time to reflect on things like identity loss following sport, my career, what I would have done differently, how I want to live my life now. And around 2017, because I was, homebound a lot of the time, I wanted something to do. And so I created this online course, and it was called Who Am I Now? The Transition to Life After Sport. And it was all about these kind of mixed emotions that we feel when we leave sport. Sometimes there's relief and excitement for the future. Sometimes there's deep grief and sadness. Sometimes there's anger and resentment. And so how do we hold space for all of these emotions? And I bring in mindfulness. And then I also talk about what you just said. How do we nurture the athlete throughout the course of their athletic career to know who they are beyond their sport? And so from that course, actually, it didn't go anywhere. I reached out to multiple gymnasts, and some showed interest, some didn't. And I ended up sending the course to my former battalion XO in the Army. And he was like, I think there's a place for this in the military.
Yeah,
So
I
then
got to
had the
interrupt you real
idea.
fast. We didn't
Yeah.
talk about this. Another thing, Theresa, is retired from the military.
Or not retired, but I did serve in the military.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another amazing thing. Okay, so you
you.
send it off to your former battalion, and
Mhm.
what happens?
He looked at it and just said, I think there's a place for this in the military, because there's a lot of overlap in like military mentality and athlete mentality. And there's a lot of transition in the military. And
Yeah.
so just in that moment, I had this idea of like, oh, I could interview soldiers and I could tell their story and I could bring in these important tools of mindfulness. And so I wrote my first book, Beyond the Battlefield, before I wrote Beyond the Chalkbox. But when I was done with Beyond the Battlefield, that's when I kind of circled back around to that initial idea with gymnasts and wrote Beyond the Chalkbox. So it was kind of like a full circle moment in a sense.
Which started with the course about
Yes.
finding identity.
Yes.
Would you mind sharing with the audience a few like critical steps, maybe one or two critical steps that coaches could take to help their athletes, and one or two steps that athletes can take while they're going through to make sure that they don't fall into the pit of no identity?
I think a really important one is self-awareness. So on the part of the coaches, having some kind of an introspective practice, whether that is rooted in religion or spirituality or pure mindfulness, where you're actually connecting with yourself on a routine basis. What are your intentions? What's important to you in life? How do you actually feel in this moment? Nurturing emotional intelligence in the coaches and self-awareness is going to be really critical for them to then be able to relate to the athlete in a skillful way. So I think it starts with yourself, and
with the coaches being self-aware, and what are our intentions, and what do we really want in life?
Yeah, self-care on the part of the coach. I know, and I'm not like calling Tom out at all, but he didn't sleep because he loves gymnastics so much, and he would like think up all these skills, and this is by no means his fault, but I'm just saying, like, encouraging coaches to get enough sleep and like eat well and take rest and take breaks, so that they're showing up as their fullest self for the athlete. I think that's really important.
I think one of the things you said, like you said, is ask yourself what's really important to you. What do you want out of life? What happens when these coaches or even the athletes are asking these questions, and the answers that they keep coming back to are just gymnastics? So let's say I, as a coach, ask, and I say, I want to put a kid on the Olympic team, and I want to have a kid get a skill named after them. And I want to, and there's
Mhm.
nothing outside of that. Are there tools to help me, um, like look beyond the tiny little circle that I'm zoomed in on, which is gymnastics?
Yeah, I think it's just deeper inquiry. It's like peeling back layers of an onion. Like, if you accomplish that, what would you feel? If you had an
Oh,
athlete on the national team, what would that allow you to feel? Oh, I would feel joy, or I would feel happiness, or I would feel worthy, or I would feel, so it's just like really getting to the deeper intention and motivation behind things. And I think when we can connect with that on a deep level, one, it alleviates the pressure of the outcome, and we can connect more deeply with that authentic motivation, which is
yeah.
more pure. And then you can still accomplish these great things, but it comes from like a deeper, more authentic place that isn't so driven compulsively by an outcome, which sometimes we know that trickles down to negative repercussions for
Yeah.
the athlete.
Mm-hmm. I'll share a personal story. I didn't ask the
Yeah.
question of myself. I was very young as a coach, and what I wanted to do was win a team state championship, right? And
Mhm.
I thought this is the be all end all. This is going to establish me. I'll be a good coach when I can do this, whatever. And I remember winning the state championship and getting a big old trophy that's got to lay sideways in the back seat because it's so huge and whatever. And in the moment, I was on cloud nine, but literally on the drive home, I remember thinking to myself, now what? Because I
Mm.
realized that there wasn't going to be a statue built in my honor. There wasn't going to be a parade when I get home. I did, okay, the state championship is won and my life has changed none. And that's when I started to have some perspective about what I needed to value as a coach. It was okay
Mm.
to have goals
Yes.
like, hey, as a team, let's try to win this championship. But at leading up to that point, I was putting all of my eggs in that basket. And essentially, had I not won that, I would have come back with maybe some lowered self-esteem. And what that would have done is it would have very negatively impacted how I coached in the gym because
Mm.
um, it was going to become even more about me than it already was. Right?
Mhm.
Because I needed that championship to feel good, right? And thank heavens I got the championship early enough to realize that this doesn't really it feels good for about, a minute and a half. And then
Right.
after that it's not lasting. So what a great question. How is
Yes.
it going to make me feel if I do that? What a
Yeah.
great question. Did you have anybody that was like encouraging you? Like, did you have a conversation with somebody and you were talking about these things and they said, "Man, Theresa, you're really smart. You should write a book about this," or was this just completely internal and organic?
This was internal and organic. Yeah, both of the books just kind of felt like the whole process to me felt organic. The writing, the interviews, everything kind of happened in the right time, which to me is interesting because I've always been somebody who's tried to control the process, and obviously getting sick, and like over the last 10 years I've been learning to let go of that. But to me, I just like I did the interviews and it felt good, and then I let them sit for a little bit, and then when I was ready to write, I revisited the interviews, and it just kind of felt like the writing happened very naturally, and all of the my thoughts that I reflect on afterwards, those came very authentically. So I just kind of allowed the process and trusted the process.
For the Beyond the Chalkbox book,
Mhm.
how long did the process take?
Take. I started it in 2022. I started doing the interviews and then got the interviews done pretty quickly. And then I, again, just kind of, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just a lot of energy to do that. And given that I was kind of sick, I had to rest. But it was also just like, okay, I did that. I'm good with it. And then it was like a year later, I revisited the interviews. And as soon as I started revisiting them, then I started writing. And then at that point, it was like the ball just got rolling. And then the
Yeah.
publication was about, yeah, 2 years, maybe a little bit over 2 years later.
Okay. Um, Speaking as a guy who does not write books, that seems like that's fast. Like, I can't
Oh, really?
imagine. Yeah, I can't imagine like going, okay, I'm going to write a book about this, and then 2 years later have one to the publisher. So good on you. Well, again, that's
Thanks.
why I'm sitting here going, man, I keep having these amazing people on my show, and they're making me look bad. Rather than self-improve or look internally how I can become actually better, I'm just going to find somebody lower so that I just feel better. It's all artificial. All right,
You
back
do
to
great
your,
things, Ken.
well, that's very kind of you to say. Speaking of great things, chapter 2 in your book is probably, it's intellectually my favorite chapter of the book, because in my mind, it is the meat and potatoes of the book, and the chapters that come after it are all sort of support material and reinforcement. And so chapter 2 is titled Two Foundational Life Tools, Mindfulness and Meditation. Can you define exactly what you mean by these for our audience, and maybe even talk about how you arrived at these two tools being essential in your life and in the lives of others?
Well, mindfulness, I mean, by definition, it's an intentional presence that's free of judgment. So it's simple, but it's hard to do. So it's really coming back to this moment, redirecting our attention to the truth of what's happening right here and now without the judgment of how we think it should be. There are a lot of different ways that we can practice mindfulness. We can become mindful of our breath. We can become mindful of our bodies. We can observe our mind, which is a very interesting thing. We can observe feeling tones in our bodies. So mindfulness in and of itself is just a practice of intentional presence. That's really like the root of it.
Well, give our audience an example of how could Ken Harris, while he's doing a podcast,
Mhm.
what is he going to be mindful of here? What are some
Mhm.
thoughts that help him to be mindful without judgment? Because that's a critical component of this.
I often think mindfulness in and of itself is something that I don't practice in the heat of the moment. So if that makes sense, like in competition, I'm not going to be intentionally focusing on mindfulness. When you're kind of on or you're performing, this is the time to let your body and your mind naturally unfold. But outside of that, like, okay, an intentional mindfulness practice would be, say you're feeling really frustrated with an athlete and you're about to yell or you're about to say
Mhm.
something that might be hurtful to the athlete. You just pause and you just feel your feet on the ground. So you become mindful of the feeling of your feet touching the earth, and then you feel one breath. So it's really about feeling, like dropping out of the stories of our minds. Can I feel my feet touching the earth? Can I feel myself inhale? And can I feel myself exhale? And it's really as simple as that. Like that's the basis of a mindfulness practice. And I wanted to share this quote from Viktor Frankl because it really encompasses all of what mindfulness is. He said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom.
Wow.
So to me, mindfulness gives us the space. So we're less reactive. We're less like reacting out of habitual thoughts or patterns. And we get that space where we can actually choose our response, which is much more skillful usually than if we're not connecting to how we're feeling in the moment.
This is absolute gold. I've
Mm.
talked on this podcast about, hey, mistakes I've made as a young coach and interacting with athletes, and ways in which I matured, and I, through dumb luck or accidental behaviors or whatever, I found ways to practice mindfulness literally at times
Mm.
when I would notice, hey, I'm about to get heated. I'm about to say some things that I don't want to say, maybe even certainly don't mean, and
Right.
whatever. And uh, those things made me so much a better coach when I was
Mm.
in my 40s than when I was in my 20s and 30s. And
Mhm.
um, I have said many times on this podcast, if there's a young Ken Harris out there listening to this, grab these tools now. Do better than I did. Be better in your 20s and 30s than I was in my 20s and 30s. And I think this is just an absolutely critical tool. But what it requires, and you call it mindfulness, and that's the right word for it. I've always thought of it as sort of like introspection or being self-aware, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say I, as a coach, had an eruption at a kid. I have to be aware at some point, even if it's not in the moment, later on, where I reflect and go, "That's not a moment I'm proud of. I don't want to do that again. How do I keep myself from doing it?" And then the natural way for me is to make an excuse. Well, if she wouldn't have X, Y, Z, but the reality is, the only person who has control over me and my reactions is me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I am responsible for how I react, no matter what she does. And that's true in my marriage, and it's true in my parenting. It's true with my employees. So
Mm-hmm.
I have to be aware, or to use your word, I have to be mindful enough to know that
Mm-hmm.
I am the one who controls my response to what happens out there. And when you were reading that quote from, what was his name again?
Viktor Frankl, the World War II concentration camp
Yeah.
victim.
It just resonated in my skull up there.
Mm-hmm.
What a fantastic quote. Um,
Mm-hmm.
this was a really good example of how a coach can use it. Got anything like, as a coach,
Mm-hmm.
we can hand to our athlete and say, "Here, try this"?
The body scan practice is something that I think I started my own mindfulness practice with this, and I think it's very accessible to even kids, and you can do it in a couple of minutes. And it's basically just, well, kind of like what I just said as an example, but you're connecting to the feeling of your body and you're just scanning your body and feeling what you're feeling without having to fix it, relax it, change it. Um, so, like a basic body scan would be, you can close your eyes, you can drop your attention to your feet, feel any sensations in your feet. Can you feel your legs? Can you feel your belly? Can you feel your chest? And you just kind of do a brief scan. You can do this in formal meditation, which takes like 30 to 45 minutes, or you can do it in what I call informal practice, which is just like in the moment. Can you connect to your body in a way that's free of judgment? So, how could a coach do this with a gymnast? Maybe before they start practice or at the end of practice might actually be better because it sets the nervous system into a state of recovery. Is just lay your athletes down and do a 5-minute body scan with them,
Hmm.
because you're in such a mode. And I'm not saying you have to be in this mode as an athlete of perfection, criticism, correction, getting to the next step, improving. And that's just essential. It can be a problem if we're always stuck there and we don't know how to turn it off and just be with how we are. So I think a body scan at the end of the practice could be a nice reset for the athletes that like just brings their nervous system into a state of balance. It
Hmm.
adjusts their relationship with their body where they're like, I'm okay just as I am. I can just feel how I feel. I don't have to fix anything. I don't have to perfect myself. And in
Hmm.
that way, it sets the whole nervous system up for recovery. And it's a really basic practice. So, mindfulness of the body is a really good one, especially with gymnasts, because we are we are aware of our bodies, but usually in a hypercritical
I
way.
was literally gonna say we are hyper aware. Yeah,
Yes.
that's
Yes.
and hypercritical is even better. All right, so the
Mhm.
next chapters are super fascinating because they are interviews, and here are the people. You have Michelle Desare, Tracy Talavera, Lucy Weiner from Tennessee, Betty
Mhm.
Aquino, Kim Zemeskel, John Roethlisberger lives in Tennessee, John McCready lives in Tennessee, Blaine Wilson, Justin Spring, and Akash Modi.
Yeah.
How did you settle on these athletes? What made you say, I want to talk to
Good
these
question.
people?
Some of them, I knew them. A lot of them, I knew them. And so I felt comfortable reaching out, and I also knew that they were absolutely phenomenal and some of the best of the
I mean,
best.
we
So I
already
wanted to
talked
get
about how
that.
you and Kim Zemeskel are like this, and so we're
Yes.
dropping that name.
We're besties. Yeah. Yeah. It is interesting. I don't even know how. So over the last, 10 or so years, I had Betty Okino's phone number. I had Kim's Meskel's phone number. And it wasn't like we were great friends who kept in touch all the time, but I felt comfortable enough to reach out to them and say, would you be willing to do an interview and share your story? And they were both very open and willing. Michelle Dussert, obviously, she was my coach, so I felt comfortable with her. Tracy Talavera, she and I had connected over the last several years with the alumni association that she created. I was potentially going to be part of that. So she and I had connected through Facebook. And of course, she was one of my childhood idols. And so um, that's how I connected with them. Lucy Weiner, I actually didn't know about, which she's the untold story, obviously, of the 1984 Olympics. It's devastating, and her story needed to be heard. And Michelle Dussert suggested, she said, reach out to Lucy and ask her if she'll tell her story. So I got to connect with Lucy. She's phenomenal. And then
hyper intelligent, like really phenomenally smart.
Yeah, she's great. And then the men, John McCready and I knew each other from the Olympic Training Center, back when I was 13, 14, 15, he was living there. So I knew him somewhat. And then I got a couple of other people's numbers through the Johns, John Roethlisberger and John McCready.
Yeah, they know everybody.
Yeah, they do. Obviously, yeah, they run Flip Fest, and then John Roethlisberger commentates. So,
and they're both like
big
personalities that are like, they're magnetic and charismatic.
Yes.
They know everybody because they're real easy to like. They're just likable guys.
They are, yeah, so easy to talk to, so easy to do an interview with.
And
then
humble.
Justin Spring, humble, yeah. Justin Spring, he was coaching the University of Illinois when we were here at West Point last time, and NCAAs were here in 2017, and I was kind of like a host for a couple of the teams. So I had met Justin then, and then reached out to him. And at the time of our interview, he was still the coach of the University of Illinois, and then he moved over to Alabama.
Was there anybody pre-interview that you were saying, man, I'd really love to interview this person? Like you were sort of secretly like, man, I'd really like to get this story.
Well, there were a lot of them. But obviously Kim's Meskel, because I wanted to be her, I mean, I looked at her every move. I knew her every routine. And so, yeah, getting to interview her was such a joy. And I'm sure my little childhood self would have never in her wildest dreams imagined that I would have gotten to do that. So,
is there a story that you heard, but it just didn't make the final cut for the book that you'd share with the audience?
Well, every story made the cut.
Okay.
Because there wasn't really anything that I left out. I mean, I went through every interview word for word and got the quotes and but I have a favorite story that stands out to me.
Okay.
Is John Roethlisberger's. And I know it sounds kind of simple, but it just really speaks to me this day and age with NIL, and there's just so much fame and fortune involved in sports that I think we're disconnecting from the love of it and like the daily grind. And he was reflecting on his career, and he made a comment like, if I could go back and do anything over, it wasn't going to another Olympic Games. It wasn't going back and winning another, he won 4 national titles. He won multiple NCAA titles. It was none of that. It was going back to his grungy, tiny little gym at the University of Minnesota that didn't even have a full vault runway. It was like 67 feet or something. A high bar that came out of a brick wall because there wasn't enough room for the whole high bar. He's like, I would go in there, be with my teammates, do a 2 a day, and just strive for greatness.
Oh, man.
And I thought, I just love that, because it is those memories that stand out. It's not all of the championships and the titles. It's like how it developed our character, and that pursuit of greatness is something that it's hard to come by sometimes. Once we have that experience as an athlete, I think we're always striving for it in our lives afterwards. So I love that story with John. It was just so pure and just the love of sport.
For people who did, sports seriously, even if they weren't great at it, we can all relate. We can all relate. Like there's a reason we call them the good old days. Yes. Right? Because they were the good old days. What do you want the readers of your book to take away from it?
Yeah, there are a lot of things. I mean, I guess it depends on the reader because I do want this to be directed to gymnasts and athletes, and I want them to feel like they're not alone in their struggles,
Mm.
that like this path is filled with highs and lows. And if you have lows, it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. And I want them to feel empowered with tools, to reach their fullest potential as an athlete and also nurture themselves outside of the sport.
Listen, I like that you wrote the book for the athlete, but when
Mhm.
I read it as a coach and said, this is really important material for a coach. Like really
Yes.
important material for a coach because
Yeah.
we have an ability to influence and shape how these gymnasts or if these gymnasts perceive these things. I thought this was an excellent
Mhm.
resource. If you'll allow me to compliment you in
Thank
that way,
you.
that you wrote a book for an athlete from an athlete's perspective, interviewing lots of athletes and whatever. And as a coach, I
Mhm.
go, man, I need to know that. My coaches need to know that.
Mm. Yeah, I did. I mean, I had multiple populations in mind when I wrote it, and coaches are definitely one of them. Coaches and parents. My mom read it and she was like, "I wish I would have had this when you were going through gymnastics." And that's why
Yeah, I
it's
didn't even
called Beyond
think
the
about
Chalkbox:
that.
Insight and Inspiration from Olympic Gym, because the insight it's profound in a lot of ways. These athletes have lived the highs and lows of a very arduous journey. So they have a lot of wisdom to offer and share. So
I'm a parent.
yeah,
My
definitely
daughter
coaches.
is 24. My son is 22. She was a super high level volleyball player and then beach volleyball. Like she
Mm.
finished NCAA's as the like number 8 ranked pairs and whatever. And my son
Wow.
did high level gymnastics and then football and soccer at a very, very high level. And this book went right over my head as a parent. And now that I sit back and
Mm.
think about you saying that, I go, yeah, oh my gosh, this is an
Yeah,
absolutely fantastic book for parents too. Wow. All right.
good. Oh, that's good. That's good to know. Yeah, because I want people to take away the holistic feel of it all, that we can nurture the athlete or we can nurture the human being that is an
That is
athlete,
an athlete.
making that
Yes, ma'am.
distinction.
Totally
Yeah.
agree. Totally agree.
And
Um,
allow people to find their path that feels authentic, and don't be afraid to talk about things like religion and spirituality and like these deeper things that are actually the essence of who we are that comes through in our sport.
hmm,
Our sport is not who we are. The essence of who we are comes through in our sport.
yeah,
How do we nurture that? How do we build upon that? Um, and I also want to say that I wrote this too for people who are unaffiliated with athletics, who think that it's okay to pass judgment and post mean comments on like social media towards these athletes. And they have no clue. They have no clue what we've been through. And so just to like, yeah, bring light to some of this for people who don't understand so that they don't pass judgment so quickly.
well, I'm super glad that you um, wrote that and have that passion. My experience is like internet trolls are going to be internet trolls. Like
Yeah.
it's easy to hide behind a keyboard and tell everybody how great they should be.
Yes.
Right. All right. I'm going to move back to gymnastics for just a minute as we start to wrap this up.
Okay.
Um, and I asked you this question in a telephone conversation, and you had what I thought was the perfect answer. So I'm going to ask it the exact same way I asked it, and I'll have you
Hope that I
correct me
answer.
again when you answer. I said, how did gymnastics shape your life?
Yeah, I think that I'm just realizing that it was like more the essence of who I am that shaped my gymnastics
Yes.
career,
Yes.
because I was just innately athletic. I was innately a perfectionist. I was innately a hard worker. Um, and then I loved the sport. It was just like the love of that pursuit of greatness and accomplishing these things and expressing through my body in this way. So it was like I actually shaped my gymnastics career. And of course, gymnastics shaped who I was too, but it was like this like kind of symbiotic
Yeah.
relationship in a way.
Yeah, I love that answer. I love that there was some like correction in the response. I thought it was really
Mhm.
fantastic. So then, would you sign your kids up for gymnastics?
Yes, I did. I have one son, he's 10, and I signed him up before he was 1 year old. He did mommy and me classes for a while, and then he did some tumbling here on post, and he's kind of gotten more into football and baseball, but I love gymnastics. Like I said, I fell out of love with it for a while, but like as I'm older and as I have this hindsight's 2020 perspective, I love it, and it's always going to be a part of me, and the things that it can teach both on a just purely physical level, a foundational sport that teaches every skill you need for any other sport, along with things like being a good teammate and being able to focus and work through hard things. Like it's a great life teacher. So yes, I have signed him up.
So, based on your elite experience and stuff, I got a two-parter for you. I think I know the answer to this. But if you had a daughter, let's pretend you had a daughter, and she wanted to do elite gymnastics, would you allow or encourage her in this? And would you like really want her to be Tom and Lori's athlete?
Yes, I would feel completely comfortable having her be Tom and Lori's athlete. Would I encourage the elite path? Yes, if she loved it and I knew the coaches, I knew their approach. Obviously, I have such a better perspective now.
Sure.
I know what to look for in a healthy coach. So, yeah, if she loved it, and I would be a very intentional parent around it. I would teach her these things like mindfulness and self-love and compassion, and also encourage her to push through difficulty when it's warranted. And so I would be an intentional parent. I would make sure that her coaches are intentional, and I would encourage her to follow her love.
I love this answer. All right. How can my audience get a copy of your book?
Amazon.
Okay.
It's on Amazon, it's on Barnes & Noble online, and then I also send signed copies. You know, I sent out a lot of signed copies at the beginning when it first came out, and I love doing that if people want that.
So speaking of signed copies of your book, I'd like to offer at my expense, I'd like to purchase them, an opportunity for 3 members of my audience to receive a free autographed copy of Beyond the Chalkbox. To be entered, audience, you need only subscribe to the YouTube channel and leave a comment in this video book. I'll randomly select 3 winners and send it out to you. Theresa, are you willing to autograph 3 copies of the book for me to purchase?
I would love to.
That's awesome. Theresa, it's really been great to get to know you over the last couple of months. And before you go, I want to ask you the 2 time machine questions that I ask all of my guests. First, if you could go back in time and undo any one decision you've ever made, what would it be?
Yeah, I've thought about this, and this is kind of a deep answer, but you know, when I was 12 years old, I read an article about Shannon Miller, and she had a low-fat diet. And I kind of went to this extreme and developed disordered eating. Not that this was like my conscious choice, but if I could make a decision and not do that, I would do that because it had negative repercussions throughout the rest of my life. So fueling myself in a way and having a healthy relationship with food, I wish I would have had that.
All right. Well, then second, if you could go back in time and offer any one piece of advice to young Theresa, what would it be? And you can't say eat healthy because you already said that.
No, I'm not. No, I think it's like stay connected to your love and your joy. So like wherever that takes you. And for me, it was gymnastics for a very long time. And so I think I would say allow that love and joy of the sport to guide you. And then beyond sport, same thing. Allow the love and the joy to guide you.
Wow. All right. Finally, I always like to ask my guests for a book recommendation, obviously, Beyond the Chalkbox for you. Aside from that, is there a book that you'd like my audience to read that you go, hey, this is a book that's meant a lot to me or helped me a lot? Or just that you enjoyed?
So Tara Brach has a couple of books, and one of them is Radical Acceptance. And that was a book that really changed my life. And I think it can be super powerful. I know a couple teammates of mine who read it, and it was really Radical Acceptance. Yeah, by Tara Brach, Tara. It talks a lot about mindfulness, but it also just talks about healing our relationship with ourselves. And it's a beautiful book. So Radical Acceptance.
Tara Brach. All right, my book recommendation is honestly going to be Beyond the Chalkbox because I thought the book was really easy to read. It was really well written. And if my audience enjoys the content of these podcasts where we tell stories and we give like information, like helpful information, then I think they'll really enjoy the format of the book because the book was almost like a Stick the Landing podcast where it told a bunch of stories and filled us in with a bunch of good information in there. So I'm going to recommend it to my audience. It's been an absolute privilege to have you on the show today. Good luck to you on the sale of your book. As usual, people, until the next episode of Stick the Landing podcast, brought to you by Iron Business Solutions, I'm Ken Harris with Iron Business Solutions, and we'll have stories to tell and solutions to deliver for your gymnastics business. If you want more information about the many ways Iron Business Solutions can help you reach your vision for your gymnastics gym, visit us on the web or social media. See you next month. Hey, if you enjoy this podcast, please be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to all of our social media and leave us a review. Links in the description.